Hello and welcome to the reissuance of Help Me Grow Los Angeles Pathways Technical Assistance Provider. This info session will focus on the revisions and additions made in the addendum number 1. Please note that the webinar will be recorded. So a few house rules and reminders. One, this webinar is being recorded. Please mute yourself or if you're using your phone or computer to ensure that we don't have any audio difficulties. As far as questions, please submit your questions using the questions panel throughout the presentation. Do not raise your hand for the questions. We do have the questions pop-up box open, so I can see whenever you submit any questions. All callers will remain muted throughout this presentation. We do have a Q&A session at the end of the presentation where we will address the questions you submit in written form. So those are the boxes I was talking about. But before we begin, I want to do a quick technology check. Please raise your hand to see if you can hear me clearly. I know I just said not to use it, but for this moment, yes. Okay, I'm seeing a few hands up, so I think that means everyone can hear me. I'm gonna, okay, putting everyone's hands down, and I want to say welcome and hello. My name is Daisy Ortiz. I'm the Contract Compliance Officer for this project. And with me, I have Ann Isbell, as well as Christina Pena, who will be part of this discussion today.
Good afternoon.
So for today's agenda, before I begin with the agenda, I actually do want to indicate that our addendum is live. You can find it on our funding site page for this project. In the red are all the items that we're going to discuss in detail because those are the updates and revisions made by addendum number 1, as well as those changes were made to the RFQ, Appendix E, and Appendix J. I would like to refer you to the May 18th webinar recording and presentation deck for the project overview for Help Me Grow LA. That's the background information. So we're not going to go through that today because we've already had that recording recorded, and we do want to spend most of our time with the changes. So Ann's going to speak on giving you a higher level pathway overview.
Thank you, Daisy. One of the major recommendations from the 2017 Help Me Grow LA planning report was to adopt an incremental approach to Help Me Grow LA to test and refine strategies before scaling countywide. This will allow us to ready the landscape for the implementation of Help Me Grow LA, and this recommendation is the origin for Help Me Grow LA Pathways. It was through data analysis, system exploration, engagement with key stakeholders over the past few years that we decided to focus on strengthening referral pathways. Please refer to Appendix B for additional context about recommendations for Help Me Grow, and also refer to the May 18th info webinar recording and presentation deck for more background information. Now, looking at the circle image on the left, each of the Help Me Grow LA Pathways community collaboratives will have one unifying agency that will subcontract with multiple collaborative agencies. The number of collaborative agencies should be represented by diverse sectors that work across the EI continuum, which is displayed on the right, and comprehensive in terms of having the experience, background, and decision-making power to make changes in the referral pathways in the community. In addition, the unifying and collaborative agencies will confer with supporting partners These supporting partners are not subcontractors in the Help Me Grow LA Pathways project and are not expected to test strategies. They are tasked with providing feedback to inform planning, implementation, and sustainability of strategies. And pending board approval, these are the selected unifying agencies for the 5 agencies. Please note, First 5LA did not receive proposals for communities 2 or 7 and anticipates releasing another solicitation focusing on these communities in the future, at which point the TA provider will support onboarding these additional communities. The TA provider will work closely with the selected unifying agencies. Unifying agencies are required to collaborate with the selected TA provider. These agencies are anticipated to start their contract on October 1st, 2020, 1 month prior to the anticipated start date of the TA provider contract. And this project is comprised of 3 phases. In phase 1, the convening of unifying and collaborative agencies and supporting partners will result in identified project needs and the selection, development, and prioritization of innovative approaches that address each community's project needs. This work will be inclusive of partnership building to establish a deeper analysis of referral pathways, including barriers to timely and effective linkage to service and consensus building regarding approaches to address identified barriers to referrals that will benefit the collaborative. This stage also includes a data collection plan aligned to identified approaches. In phase 2, the approaches that each community selects in phase 1 will enter the implementation stage within the Help Me Grow LA Pathways communities. This work includes cross-sector planning, adoption of approaches, and coaching to ensure a successful implementation. In phase 3, unifying and collaborative agencies will refine approaches based on data collected and evaluation to ensure improved coordination and functioning, and increase timely access from developmental and behavioral screening to assessment to early intervention supports for children and families. This phase will include increased sustainability planning, such as, if appropriate, scale and spread of successful approaches. To ensure progress across the phases, there should be emphasis on the following throughout the course of the project: ongoing data collection and documentation of activities and lessons learned, cross-community learning and best practice exchange between Help Me Grow LA Pathways communities, and sustainability planning from the start to identify how to sustain the approaches once First 5LA funding has ended. Given that this is a large endeavor that community collaboratives are undertaking, technical assistance, or TA, is needed to support unifying agencies and meeting the project's goals. The TA provider will be responsible for providing technical assistance, specifically EII contact expertise or early identification and intervention expertise, and capacity building to each of the unifying agencies to support them in the Help Me Grow LA Pathways investment. The TA provider will support each community collaborative's planning, implementation, and refinement of selected approaches to strengthen and expand referral pathways within the Help Me Grow LA Pathways community. The TA provider will also be responsible for supporting the unifying agencies in their data collection and oversee the process evaluation component for the project to capture learnings and improve project implementation. Furthermore, the TA provider will play a significant role in supporting the unifying agencies as they collaboratively align selected approaches to relevant local, state, and federal policies and regulations. In addition, the TA provider will synthesize promising practices and findings from the Help Me Grow LA Pathways communities as it relates to technology, infrastructure, and practice change to inform statewide and local policy and systems change. It is expected that the TA provider will support the 7 unifying agencies by strengthening their competencies to successfully execute the following roles: multi-level community coordination, communication and outreach, regional learning, resource mobilization, and piloting collaborative identified strategies. I will now turn it over to Christina to discuss the scope of work for the TA provider component of this investment.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Anne. Now turning to the scope of work for the TA provider component of this investment. Please refer to pages 16 through 20 of the RFQ for a detailed description of each of the tasks assigned to the TA provider role. Please note the solicitation has been updated to also include proposers from higher education, in addition to proposals from individuals and organizations. In order to successfully design and provide TA support for the unifying agencies representing the 7 Help Me Grow Pathways communities, First 5 LA has outlined 10 distinct tasks over the duration of the entire project. The following scope of work was refined based on the past solicitation, as well as the proposals and questions received for the Help Me Grow LA Pathways RFP solicitation released fall 2019, which then resulted in the selection of the 5 unifying agencies, which Anne mentioned earlier in the presentation. First 5 LA expects that the TA provider oversee all 10 tasks that are outlined in the scope of work for this section. The TA provider cannot subcontract out tasks 1, 3, 5, 7, 8, 9, and 10. The TA provider may subcontract if they lack expertise in a certain area, including technology platforms, database design, etc., for consultation purposes. Please note that by design, the desired qualifications we are seeking for this project, which are listed on page 21, were identified to directly support the scope of work outlined. However, we also acknowledge that some interested applicants may have strengths in other areas, but not may have strengths in some areas, but not necessarily all of the areas listed for the tasks and activities. We have identified some tasks which may require additional support via consultant with specific expertise. Therefore, the tasks that can be subcontracted include task 2, task 5, and task 6. Now turning to a brief description of the key tasks. Task 1, orientation and planning meetings. The TA provider will participate in in-person or virtual meetings with First 5 LA staff and the unifying agencies, and, if relevant, the collaborative agencies. Note that due to COVID-19 and as directed by the California Department of Public Health and the Los Angeles County Department of Public Health, the TA provider must be able to utilize virtual and telephonic communication platforms to deliver TA activities. Task 2, review data on the availability of early identification and intervention services. The TA provider is expected to collaborate with each of the unifying agencies to review and analyze existing data to inform phase 1 planning. In addition to supporting unifying agencies in interpreting and utilizing data, the TA provider will support First 5 LA with drafting and refining materials such as the Help Me Grow LA Risk Indicator Heat Map and mapping referral processes. Task 3, develop TA or technical assistance plan and curriculum. The TA is expected to draft a technical assistance and training plan with some individualization for each Help Me Grow Pathways community to support each community collaborative in reaching the Help Me Grow LA Pathways intended outcomes. Task 4, execute technical assistance plan. The TA provider will execute the technical assistance and training plan and any sub-plans with each community collaborative. Task 5, draft evaluation plan. The TA provider is responsible for process evaluation, including implementation process, and data collection for the Help Me Grow Pathways investment to capture learnings as the project is implemented and identify any improvements in real time. As such, the TA provider is expected to draft an evaluation plan that will be amended on an annual basis and as needed based on progress. Task 6, execute evaluation plan. Once approved by First 5 LA, the TA provider will execute the evaluation plan in partnership with the unifying agencies. The TA provider is responsible for managing data collection for the evaluation plan. Task 7, provide quarterly implementation summary. The TA provider provider will be responsible for providing quarterly implementation summaries to First 5LA that reflect TA progress and process evaluation findings. Task 8, submit annual Help Me Grow Pathways reports. The TA provider is expected to submit annual reports on the overall progress on the TA and evaluation plans regarding the implementation of the Help Me Grow Pathways project. Task 9, submit final reports and share findings. To elevate lessons learned to a larger audience, the TA provider will draft a final report on the Help Me Grow Pathways implementation and evaluation findings at the conclusion of the project. In addition, separate summaries should be provided aimed at the following audiences. The first audience group are our early identification and intervention providers, and the second target audience is the general public. Task 10, project management. The TA provider will maintain quality control and timeliness throughout the life of the project, which includes regular check-ins with First 5LA staff. Just as a reminder, the tasks that can be subcontracted include Task 2, Task 5, and Task 6 out of the list of 10. Next, I will pass it to Daisy to discuss terms of the project.
Thanks, Christina. There's a little bit of a delay in the PowerPoint presentation. That's why there's like pauses. But before I go into the terms of the projects, I did want to elevate the Help Me Grow Pathways TA provider RFQ network list. We will be publishing a list on our funding site for purposes of networking with other potential proposers. As Christina mentioned, we do have a long list of desired qualifications, and we do have parameters about what you can and cannot subcontract, but we also acknowledge that some of you may want to discuss with other people. So this is the list. This form is voluntary, and it is not a requirement to apply to the solicitation. Very important, voluntary. But if you would like to be included, please respond to the form, which is already listed on our funding site, and you can find it there by no later than Friday, June 19th. And I will be posting that list the following week. I do want to say that if you were an info session participant for the first info session and you've already emailed your consent, you do not have to fill this form out. But if you haven't and you want to be part of the list, please fill out the form. Thank you. So for terms of the project, these are pages 21 through 22. There are some changes. So the first one is, this is now an 8-month agreement with an anticipated start date of November 1st, 2020. Please note these differences are differences that are highlighted in addendum number 1. And they are, when you look at the documents, we have highlighted them. Project remain the same. Estimated project budget is still the same of $600,000 for up to 7 Help Me Grow LA pathway communities. This next section will make sense in a second, but travel expenses, if any, should not exceed 5% of the total project budget. And the TA provider must be able to utilize virtual and telephonic communication platforms to deliver TA activities, as well as have an in-person accessibility. Based on our learnings and shifts, this project may be extended. While there is no guarantee for an extension, First 5LA is seeking proposers that could potentially continue beyond the estimated project term. So for eligibility requirements and desired qualifications, these are listed on page 20. So there is a change. So the eligibility requirements now are There's still two, but the first one is the proposers must have and maintain a permanent physical office location in the state of California for the duration of the project. So this was a significant eligibility change. So please note it. Second, the second requirement or eligibility requirement is still the same, but proposers cannot be a First 5 LA Help Me Grow LA Pathways Unified Agency, collaborative agency, or other subcontractor or a supporting partner. If you are unsure if you fall within any of these categories, there is also another Google form that you could submit with your inquiry. And so this link is also on our funding site, and this is generally what it looks like. So these requirements are reviewed during level 1, and proposers that do not meet the requirements do not advance to the next level of review. And as far as location, what we're looking for is a permanent physical location. So a home office is acceptable. First 5 may request additional information to validate this requirement, and this requirement does refer to all key personnel. So for the second eligibility requirement, the reason why there's a separate link is because we realize that a lot of, specifically these questions, they're pretty personal to the person who's applying. So if you submit your question through this way, we are trying to distinguish them from general questions from the solicitation. And because they're personal, we are not publishing these questions because they're very specific to one, like usually one individual or one agency. So there is a difference. So Christina will walk through the desired qualifications.
Thank you, Daisy. So yes, now turning to desired qualifications, which have been identified to support the scope of work outlined earlier in the presentation. The desired qualifications for the TA provider has been organized into 3 categories. First, early identification and intervention. Second, capacity building. And third, evaluation. Please refer to page 21 of the RFQ for details. Under the early identification and intervention category, we are seeking proposers with knowledge of the early identification and intervention topic for young children with developmental and behavioral delays specific to Los Angeles County. We're also seeking knowledge of best practices in the development and implementation of effective referral pathways, including technology, infrastructure, and practice change, and demonstration of cultural competency in the development and implementation of referral pathways. Second, within the capacity building category, we are seeking proposers with experience providing capacity building and TA to county agencies, programs, and/or community-based organizations. We are seeking experience collaborating with Los Angeles County systems such as regional centers, health, mental health, child welfare, and early childhood education programs in schools. Experience developing meeting agendas, training content and facilitation. Experience in convening stakeholders to develop a common learning agenda, and an ability to manage and negotiate complex relationships to advance project goals. And last, under the evaluation category, we are seeking proposers with experience interpreting qualitative and quantitative data, experience implementing basic evaluation approaches and methods, including selecting key outcomes, collecting and analyzing data, and interpreting evaluation information, and experience with designing and implementing a process evaluation, for example, an implementation process that will further help to facilitate ongoing quality improvement and regional learning. I will now pass it on to Daisy to discuss required documents and the selection process.
So the required documents and selection process are on pages, the required documents are on pages 23 and 24, and the selection process is on page 22 and 23. So as far as required documents, they're still the same. That didn't change. You still have to submit our required documents through our online application process, which we will give you an overview shortly. We have also given you Appendix F as an application checklist to ensure that you have a complete application. Omission of any document or form may constitute an incomplete proposal and may be grounds for disqualification. Also, adherence to the page limitations is very strongly encouraged. If you submit extra pages, unfortunately, they do not get reviewed. So these are the required documents. I'm going to go through each one individually. So for the online application, the application has been updated to reflect the new eligibility requirement. The language in the solicitation has also been updated to as follows. We now say, in order to respond to this RFQ, proposers must complete an online application form and submit all required documents specified below through the online application process. We had the link to the actual application, but we also included a link to the instructions on how to set up the online application. Please note that the online application has, I already said that. There were no changes to the resume. As far as the narrative, this has changed. We have increased it to 14 pages. And the item in red is the addition. So we are asking for you to detail the method you intend to use to deliver the described approach. For example, in person, virtually, a combination of both. And if you have personnel that are not in LA County area, how to include how they will be accessible to unifying agencies. So that's an addition to this item. For the scope of work, as mentioned, this is also a change. The scope of work, you are to complete the scope of work using the template, describe the objectives, methods, and related key activities to carry out the major functions for an initial 8-month agreement period of November 1st, 2020 to June 30th, 2021. Please refer to Section 5 of the solicitation for the required scope of work activities. So that for this document, that was the major change, just the period is smaller. For the required document proposed rates, please note that this document does differ from the initial release, reflecting a change to a task order contract. So First 5 will still issue task orders for each assignment with a specified scope and schedule. The number of hours per assignment shall be negotiated before work commences, but using Appendix J, proposers should clearly indicate the proposed hourly rates for each key proposed personnel for each task. Add any additional columns for staff as needed. In addition, so that's step 1. Step 2 is to provide a narrative rationale for your proposed rates. And step 3 is if you anticipate any travel costs, then estimate those across the total project term, which is up to 3 years. So you are estimating 3 years worth of travel. As indicated by Section 8 of the terms of the project, travel expenses, if any, should not exceed 5% of the total project's budget. So this is our payment structure for this project. As far as any overhead or administrative costs that some organizations sometimes require, they would have to be built into your hourly rates. But for this project, this is the proposed rates that we're using for this project. This is my favorite document. So the litigation and contract compliance form. Please note that if you check yes to any of these questions, specifically number 1, please make sure that you explain the circumstances of the response and explain whether this will impact the project on the solicitation. Don't forget the second part, because oftentimes people do. But if you check yes to any of these, you are prompted to do a 2-step response. 1, what is the circumstance for why you chose yes? And 2, is this going to impact the project on the solicitation? Omissions of this form will constitute an incomplete proposal and may be grounds for disqualification. Obviously, all of the required documents are part of the proposal. This form is too. So as far as selection process and review criteria, that's on pages 22 and 23. We didn't have any changes. The only thing I am going to highlight is that for level review 3, please review the tentative interview dates, which are included in section 1, timeline for selection process. These are the anticipated dates where we intend to hold the interviews. So please hold them. Granted, they are subject to change at First 5 LA's sole discretion, but that's something that we try to keep very close to the schedule. As far as the other levels of review, I already discussed level 1, which is an administrative review, where we look at proposals for completeness and minimum requirements, which includes timely receipt of the proposal, submission of all required attachments, and adherence to eligibility requirements. Proposals with omissions of any of the documentation is subject to disqualification. So we also do a due diligence review that includes a review of the litigation and contract compliance form. That's why I spent a little bit of time asking you to answer the second part of that question, because we review that as part of level 1. And we determine whether the proposer may have been a current, former contractor, grantee, or vendor is in non-compliance with First 5 LA under any existing or past agreements with First 5 LA. And First 5 LA does reserve the right to request additional information if needed to validate and or determine minimum requirements. So if, for example, on the eligibility requirement, you have a home office, we may ask you for additional documents just to validate that eligibility requirement. We also conduct a conflict of interest review for proposers, including the subcontractors. For level 2, we review the proposals. We conduct a conflict of interest check on the reviewers and have them sign a form certifying that there are no conflicts of interest. And the proposal review panel is going to comprise of First 5 LA staff, proposers scoring highly on level 2, then pass on to level 3, which is the interview. And the highest scoring proposer based on a combined level 2 and 3 scores will be recommended to First 5 LA's Board of Commissioners for award of the contract. Excuse me. So Appendix E has changed. Appendix E is the level 3 review score. Actually, yeah. So this review scoring criteria is what the review panel is going to look at when evaluating your proposal. So I highly recommend that you look at it because you'll see how the review panel is going to evaluate your proposals. Please note that in light blue are the additional criteria that have been added to this proposal to review the proposals. That sounded awkward, but for the summary score, the total max scores for the 3 sections have been updated. In section 1, the narrative, page 2, criteria B has been clarified to now say the approach is logical given the total project term of up to 3 years. Criteria F and G have been added to the review tool. So now criteria F is the method to deliver TA support via virtual and in-person platforms is comprehensive and accessibility to First 5 LA staff and community collaborative. Criteria G is degree to which proposers meet desired knowledge of EII landscape in LA County qualification. The scores for this section have been modified to account for additional criteria added to section 1 of the narrative. Section 2, understanding the scope of work, has been modified to account for the additional criteria added in sections 1 of the narrative and 3 of the proposed rates. And section 3, proposed rates, criteria C has been added to the review tool, which states rationale for proposed travel costs was reasonable and appropriate. The scores for this section have also been modified to account for the additional criteria added in sections 1 of the narrative and 2 of understanding the scope of work. So application submission, like I said, failure to submit all required documents will constitute an incomplete proposal and may be grounds for disqualification. Applications that fail to adhere to First 5 LA's page limitation requirements will be adjusted by the removal of pages from the application. Pages will be removed before the proposal review. So those pages are not going to be made available to the reviewers. Proposers are responsible for any errors, omissions in their proposals and applications, and it is the responsibility of the proposer to ensure that prior to submission that its proposal reflects the requirements of the solicitation. Please don't wait to submit your documents through the online application system minutes before closing. First 5 LA will not be held responsible for any delays proposers may encounter with the online application due to multiple proposers uploading their documents before closing time. First 5 LA shall not be liable for any costs incurred in connection with a proposer's preparation of a proposal in response to this RFQ. Any cover letters, resumes, CVs, including attached materials submitted in response to this RFQ, becomes First 5 LA's property and is subject to public disclosure. And proposals received after the deadline will not be considered. So the new deadline is July 17th. That was meant to say 2020 at 5 p.m. So this year. Please continue checking the Funding Center webpage regularly for updates and addenda. We have the right to amend the solicitation by written addenda, as noted by this presentation. we are receptive where we can be, and this is why we're here. So as far as timeline, that's on page 3 of the solicitation. And we are here today. Info session for the addendum changes. Please save the dates. The interviews are scheduled to occur on August 18th and 19th. The final date to submit questions or requests for additional information is July 9th. We will be posting responses to all questions we've received by July 14th. And the proposal is due July 17th. We anticipate selecting a TA provider by August 24th, and we're going to submit the awarded applicant for Board of Commissioner approval on October 8th, and we anticipate starting the technical assistance contract by November 1st. So the biggest change here is the due date, which is now July 17th. So that is all we have for you today. We will place you on a brief hold. We actually haven't received any questions. So if you have any questions, please submit them. But this isn't your only opportunity to submit questions. As detailed, you do have till July 9th. If no one has any questions, we can conclude our session early. Oh, we got a question. I'm going to place you on hold while we review. Give me a second. Hello?
Daisy, we can hear you, just so you know.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Yeah, something happened. So the question we received, we will be responding to it in written form offline. And to clarify, we will be answering questions as they come up, but posting all of the questions by July 14th. So there may be some questions that have already been submitted. And if we haven't answered to you just yet, a lot of the questions we received during the first round, if you will, prompted the addendum change. So it isn't that we ignored your questions. We actually took them very much to heart. And that's actually what prompted the first addendum change. But as far as the first question we received, we will have to respond to that particular question offline in written form. But again, we will post it on our funding site. So if there aren't any other questions, I think we can safely conclude. Actually, let me show you. So if you do have any questions between now and July 9th, please send them my way. My email address is dortiz@first5la.org. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to continuing the conversation. Christina Ann, would you like to say something?
Thank you, everyone, for your interest. And as Daisy said, please, If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to Daisy. Thank you so much.
Have a great day, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.